Meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for July 25th, 2022. Our first order of business is approval of the agenda. Did anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? I'll note that we will have public comment from a couple of people, but we'll do that after our employee recognition. With that, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
Second. Moved by Councilmember Chambliss, second by Fredson. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The agenda is approved. Next is approval of the July 11th, 2022 Transportation Committee meeting minutes. Did anyone have any changes or additions? All right. Seeing and hearing none, entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Fredson, seconded by Councilmember Cummings. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. And the motion carries. And we are on to employee recognition, and I'm going to turn it over to Leslie Canderas.
Right. Chair Barber, committee members, we have 2 Metro Transit employees to recognize today. These 2 employees are being recognized for very different work and different types of contributions, but one thing they have in common is their excellence that's leading them to be recognized today is really embodies our top priorities and values here at Metro Transit, both relating to equity and inclusion and public safety on our system. So thank you to the committee for continuing to allow time for employee recognition at these meetings. And I'm going to turn it over to Theresa Kane, manager for Commuter programs, to introduce the first employee we're recognizing tonight.
Hey, Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'm Theresa Kane. I'm the manager of our Commuter programs department. And this is Tennille Warren, who is here to be recognized. And I want to read this correctly. Tennille was working at one of our Juneteenth events, and she was observed by a coworker who was there that day and said, "I will never forget how you quickly switched your role to that of a social worker therapist, comforting a woman who stopped by our tent and cried after sharing her story with you. I didn't get a chance to know her story, but how you comforted her and made purely connected with her was really a moving moment and made me a little emotional." This is from Nasser, who's there in the back. That moment became the highlight of my day, and it will be in my memory of Juneteenth for years to come. Community engagement is beautifully unpredictable because you never know who comes to your tent or table, but it takes courage and empathy to comfort someone like you did. And of that same thing, another coworker wrote, "Tennille went above and beyond to take the lead on this day and truly make it possible. She connected personally with the bus driver, the street ops staff assigned to support the day, making sure that they felt that they were a part of the event. She made time to share the spirit of the day with our 2 special guests, the Juneteenth artist and one of her subjects, Michael Cheney. Her leadership was felt by all, and this entire event has been a showcase of what an exemplary human and employee she is." And these employees are not alone in recognizing Tennille. Coworkers from across the agency, the employers that she reaches out to in her work, and institutional customers of Travel Demand Management, and our partners also enjoy working with Tennille. She cares deeply about Metro Transit's mission and our efforts to provide a connected experience for all our customers with pride. Tennille Warren.
Chair Barber, Chief Grates is here to speak about the second employee who's being recognized.
And don't go far because we have a plaque for you. So we'll just do all of those at one time.
Good afternoon, everybody. Madam Chair, thank you, committee members, for having us here today. For folks that don't know who I am, and virtually, my name is Rick Grates. I'm the interim Chief of Police for Metro Transit Police Department, and this is Lieutenant Jason Linder, who is assigned to our patrol division. Lieutenant Jason Linder began employment at Metro Transit Police in April of 2005 after serving with the Dakota County Sheriff's Office. With his prior law enforcement experience, competence, and character, he has excelled in his various roles at the Metro Transit Police Department. He's served as a patrol officer, investigator, sergeant, and is currently lieutenant assigned to patrol and special projects. And I wish to recognize Lieutenant Linder at the meeting today for his outstanding work and dedication not only to Metro Transit, but the law enforcement profession in general. Lieutenant Linder is the planner and organizer for special events. In 2021 alone, he planned and staffed over 9,377 event hours at the various venues we serve at Metro Transit. This year's planning has already surpassed about 4,200 hours, and we still have some of the busiest times of year ahead of us, especially with NFL football and many, many other things, too many to count. Due to his diligent planning, the safety record for our staff and ridership has been exceptional. Not only is our safety record outstanding, but Metro Transit Police Department has also seen very little need to take law enforcement actions at these events due to the MTPD presence, the great wayfinding, along with clear expectations and guidance to our ridership. Lieutenant Linder's dedication to duty has been a key factor also in our post-COVID return to ridership initiatives, and his work not only brings great credit to himself, but to Metro Transit and the Metro Transit Police Department as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for your work. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for coordinating all that. It's very nice to be able to do all of that again. So, Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to comment. I think it is just great that we are doing these recognitions. It's so important because these are people who just go above and beyond over and over and over with no expectation of recognition or reward. They keep the system running. They're out there protecting the public. They're doing all of these things that make Metro Transit what it is. And I just am so glad that now we're doing public recognition, and I hope it will continue. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. Very well said. Thank you. All right. Anything else from council members? All right. We'll move on to our reports. And the first is MTS Director Carlson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Just one update for you tonight on our planning division. The regional solicitation of projects for federal transportation funding continues to take shape. You may recall from a past report, we received a record 155 applications for funding. We're looking to award upward of $230 million of funding around the end of the year. So across the summer now, scoring committees comprised of transportation professionals from around the region have worked to apply technical scores to the project. So all 155 projects now have a draft score with them. And last Thursday, those scores were released. And so now begins a process where if an applicant believes there was a mistake in the scoring, they can appeal that score. But then it would become finalized and then would really become the basis for funding scenarios of how to distribute those $230 million because, of course, the requests are quite a bit higher than the amount we have available. So TAB would develop those next, and with expectation that TAB would send a list of projects to the council for consideration of concurrence around the end of the year or early next year. So the release of the scores is a big step, and now we'll begin to see the funding scenarios take shape across the fall. I'll save some other comments for the introduction of the preliminary budget, but appreciate the opportunity, Madam Chair. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Charles. Any questions from or comments from council members? All right. Because it wasn't written down on my agenda, I skipped our public comments. So we're going to skip back to that in the interest of time so we don't have to have people stick around longer than they need to. The first person that we have is Mason Rounds. You want to come up? And we kind of try to keep the comments around 3 minutes or so?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Welcome.
So my name is Mason Rounds. I live in the Midway neighborhood of St. Paul, 445 Wheeler Street. And I want to start out by thanking Committee Chair Barber and the rest of the Transportation Committee for hearing my comment and for working with the group that I'm working with, Minnesota 350, on our input to the 2023 budgeting process. And I'm just here to give kind of a personal comment about my own relationship to transit and why I'm so invested in what the Transportation Council does, the Transportation Committee does. So I have lived all my life in the St. Paul Midway neighborhood, And I do not drive, so I've been a lifelong transit rider as well on the 21, on the A line, on the Green Line. And honestly, I've had a very good experience with Metro Transit overall. And that's led me to transit work because I want transit to be good for everyone. I want it to be welcoming, I want it to be reliable, and I want it to be equitable. In just the couple of months that I've worked with Minnesota 350, as we've begun to work with you all in the Metropolitan Council on the budgeting process, I've talked to so many people, both in administration and transit riders, who just want transit to be better for everyone. And ultimately, that's why I'm here, and that's why we're all here, is that we want to make Metro Transit a welcoming, an equitable, and a reliable means for everyone to get around the Twin Cities metro area. And that is why I support the steps in the bus riders budget that Minnesota 350 endorses. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And next we have Claire Pardowski. And I hope I said it's close to right.
That was perfect.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I have a piece of paper I'm going to read from because I'm going to outline the bus riders budget and I have a lot to say. So thank you all for having me here today, and thank you, Councilmember Barber. My name is Claire Pardowski. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a Prospect Park resident. And I travel by car, bike, and bus. I'm originally from Iowa, so I did not grow up with a robust transit system, and I'm eternally grateful for the transit system that I have access to now. And I'm also a volunteer on the MN 350 Transit Justice team. I also work as an AmeriCorps member in the field of waste reduction and sustainability. Today, I represent the Transit Justice team and the voices of everyday transit riders. We have spent the last year canvassing on light rails and bus lines, collecting comments and stories from hundreds of Metro residents who don't necessarily have the time and privilege of taking on an advocacy role, but who do rely on public transit to thrive. Based on these conversations, we have 3 demands for you to incorporate into the Metropolitan Council budget. Further details on these demands can be found at mn350.org/bus-riders-budget, which we can also provide in follow-up. First and foremost, hire light rail attendants. Unlike community service officers who are on a law enforcement track, light rail attendants pull from a broader hiring pool and invite community members to offer customer service, resources, and information to transit users. We ask that you spend $1.5 million, or just a third of the CSO budget, to hire 20 full-time equivalent attendants. This would establish a ratio of 1 attendant for every 1,800 riders with a focus on light rail service. So if you put all of them on light rails, that's what that ratio would look like. Second, restore bus and light rail routes and frequency. We recognize from conversations with you all that route cuts are mostly due to an operator shortage. To face these challenges head on and restore transit service for the folks who need it, increase operator salaries by at least 7%. With inflation at 7%, anything less than this is a pay cut, effectively. Additionally, we ask that you increase hiring bonuses for new operators to $7,000. Other CDL jobs across the metro are offering hiring bonuses ranging from $4,000 to $15,000, which is hefty. And a bonus of $1,000 simply doesn't compete. Metro Transit needs room in their budget to offer competitive wages and hiring incentives. And finally, this is not my focus today, but develop a climate and equity plan. We recognize that there is a climate work group within the council, so this demand is not my first and foremost ask of you all today, but as the Transportation Committee, we ask that you support the climate work group's efforts and take an active role to emphasize that a robust, accessible public transit system can reduce environmental impacts and increase equity and well-being for all residents of the metro. This about concludes my comments. Please don't hesitate to contact me or Adriana. You may be familiar. I know she's spoken at previous meetings, and we're eager to share examples of what an effective light rail attendant program could look like, as well as further information on why we think that competitive wages and increased incentives could help with the operator shortages. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you both for your comments. All right, we'll jump back into our agenda, and the next thing we have is Metro Transit General Manager, but tonight we have Chief of Staff Leslie Canderas here.
Thank you, Chair Barber, committee members. I have one update tonight, somewhat related to the comments we just received. Thank you for those comments. Is that we continue to work towards our quarterly service changes, which will go into effect on August 20th. Last week, we began previewing the upcoming changes on our website, and in the coming weeks, we're going to be providing more detailed schedule information and continue to communicate those changes to customers through the August edition of our Connect newsletter, social media, rider alerts, and through other channels. As it has been for all of our service changes in recent quarters, our goal is really to make sure we're maintaining the reliability of our scheduled service for our customers. And as we've shared with you previously, the August service changes do include some additional service reductions due to our ongoing operator shortage. This includes reducing frequency on light rail and some bus routes from the current 12-minute frequency to 15-minute frequency. We are currently about 29 operators short of our ideal level for the current service level and nearly 300 operators short of our 2022 budgeted service level. And at the next Transportation Committee meeting, Adam Harrington and Brian Funk are going to present their quarterly update on service changes and operator hiring to provide more in-depth information on these changes.
Thank you, Leslie. Any questions or comments from council members? All right, very good. Now we are on to our business agenda. We have no items on consent. Tonight we have 2 items on non-consent. The first is business item 2022-205, which is the Blue Line State of Good Repair Phase 3 design contract, and we have Michael Wnek here.
Hello, Madam Chair and committee members. I'm Michael Wnek. I am a Principal Project Coordinator for Rail Projects, Metro Transit, and I'm the Project Manager for Blue Line State of Good Repair Phase 3. I'm going to be presenting business item 2022-205, approval of Blue Line State of Good Repair Phase 3 Design and Construction Support Services, Contract 22P075. All right. So Blue Line State of Good Repair Phase 3, which I'm just going to call Phase 3 so I don't have to say that whole mouthful every time, is the third phase of what were previously called the Blue Line Enhancements projects. Blue Line was Metro Transit's first LRT line and is now 18 years old, opened in 2004. This project will cover the center 8 miles of the Blue Line from approximately Terminal 2 Humphrey to Cedar Riverside Station. Phase 3 is a state of good repair project focusing on replacing deteriorated and or obsolete infrastructure on the Blue Line, including signals and signal components, turnouts, rail and highway areas, communications equipment, as well as other equipment. In addition, revised track layouts at 46th and 32nd Street interlockings will help increase, or as well as bidirectional signaling between Cedar South and Fort Snelling interlockings will increase the resiliency and operational flexibility of the Blue Line. As mentioned earlier, this project is part of a series of projects previously named Blue Line's Enhancements. Previous and ongoing series of projects includes Phase 1, which completed work in downtown Minneapolis in 2017. Phase 2A, which is under construction currently between Mall of America and Bloomington Central. And Phase 2B, which is currently in design for work between Bloomington Central and Terminal 2 Humphrey. So the design for this project is anticipated to take 20 months, ending in April 2024. Construction will then take approximately 2 years, with material procurement starting in 3rd or 4th quarter of 2024. The request for proposals was issued on March 1st, 2022. There were 26 registered plan holders, including 16 consultants, 7 subcontractors, 3 plan rooms, and 6 plan holders identified as minority, women, small, veteran, or disadvantaged business enterprises. After 57 days of advertisement, the council received 1 proposal to be evaluated for consideration for award. Procurement staff did not find any indication that the project specifications were restrictive and determined that the council provided opportunities for adequate competition for this project. In accordance with the Brooks Act, the evaluation proposals followed a 2-step process. An evaluation panel consisting of council staff, project partners, and subject matter experts reviewed the proposal and ranked the technical merits of the proposer. Following approval of the evaluation panel findings, conclusions, and recommendation, the costing data of the proposer was reviewed by a negotiation panel and negotiated a price that was agreed to be fair and reasonable and recommended the WSP USA Incorporated proposal as the most advantageous to the council. The Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity set a DBE goal of 13% for this contract, and they determined that the DBE contract requirements for this project were met. So the proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council authorizes the regional administrator to award and execute contract 22P075 with WSP USA Incorporated for design and construction support services related to Blue Line State of Good Repair Phase 3 in an amount not to exceed $10,532,569. Now take any questions.
Very good, thank you, Michael. Questions from council members? Councilmember Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My usual question, we only get one bid. Any ideas why there was only one bid when there were a number of people who seemed to be interested or qualified? And do we circle back to find out what we might do differently to encourage more bids?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Cummings, very good question. Jody Jacoby, the Director of Procurement Department, and there's lots of reasons why there was only one proposal, and then there's lots of reasons why not, right? There's a lot of public work going on right now, and our procurement office has taken, in partnership with the project manager and the Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity, taken significant initiative to push information out to a lot of the consultants and contractors of interest. There's just so much public work going on, and there's a lot of projects that may cause a conflict. There was a lot of interest. We did advertise for 58 days. Typically, our standard is 38. And through addenda, extended the project a few times. We did contact a lot of the consultants who attended the pre-proposal meeting to find out if there was anything that was restrictive or anything that outlined the work to one specific proposer. And based on those conversations and based on that investigation, we determined that there was no reason why the specifications were restrictive. There's just so much work out there. A lot of these contractors and consultants are teaming up early and making early decisions on their success. And so that is, in our opinion, why there was adequate competition. And we're also taking information like this. We met today with the ACEC, so the Consultants Professional Association, and partnering with them to have more of a strategic approach and partnership to get out ahead of a lot of these big projects and find out if there's anything in the Met Council's procurement documents that we can look at to be more advantageous for them to propose. And we're pushing out our project forecasting. And in the future, for some of these projects, we're even going to start earlier to the tune of 18 months before the projects are advertised to release preliminary scopes. But for this project, we do believe that there was the due diligence, not only with procurement, with the project manager.
Councilmember Cummings?
Thank you, that's really helpful. Is the impact of hiring challenges across the world in every industry, do you think that's having an impact? I mean, I'm sure that someone doesn't want to bid who's not going to be able to follow through in a timely fashion. So that is one question. Then my second one is, do you feel that with only a single bid, although it is reasonable and responsible, was it a surprise? Do you feel it was a fair bid? Is it what you were within the realm of what you were expecting?
Yeah, good member. How about I'll start,
Okay.
and then I'll transition it to you. Madam Chair, Councilmember Cummings, in looking at some of the interviews that I have in front of me that our staff consulted with the plan holders and some of the firms that download our documents, they did reference timing of the RFP. They also referenced looking at the work that they had and the staff that they have and being very, very deliberate on which projects they were proposing and which resources they were going to be allocating to the projects that they thought that they had a good success rate. Your second question on receiving a single bid and if we still believe we had a very good value. There was a best and final offer that was submitted between the proposer and procurement and the project management, and I can let Michael talk about that, but there is a significant cost savings that was negotiated through the evaluation process. So even though we did have a single proposal, I believe it is the most advantageous for the council. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I was going to add to, Madam Chair and committee members, to your first point, at least one consultant we reached out to had very high turnover, unfortunately timed right approximately when we were offering our proposal out. So that contributed to at least one consultant's
Challenging times.
challenging. Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gonzalez?
Thank you. I was just wondering about the how long will the improvements last? I mean, you indicated that this is 18 years since the line opened. So my shorthand question would be, are we going to do the same process 18 years from now, or the repairs are for a more short-term span, or?
Madam Chair, committee members, we really try to make sure that we're building out for the future. So we're putting in state-of-the-art technology into the Blue Line now, in the hopes that it will last at least as long as this has, if not longer. In addition, we've chosen as the basis of design parts that are more, I guess, universally used across not just the transit industry, but the freight rail industry as well. We hope that will allow us to keep this technology going, or keep the various components going along for a longer period of time.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yep.
So is this span of time the average for the type of construction that you're doing?
Not sure if I have a good answer for that, I guess. No. Yes, please.
Can you please provide all the technical specifications and load-bearing matrices and all of that?
Madam Chair, committee member, my name is Ryan Heath. I'm a project manager with the same group that Mike's with. I'm currently the project manager for Phase 2. We're currently under construction on the south end of Blue Line between Mall of America and the BCS station. So a couple of comments on the lifespan. I would say maybe on Blue Line, we've gotten a little less life out of certain components than we'd want to. And I think a big part of that is we're actually one of the first light rail systems to be built in an environment like this. So we have some peer agencies such as Edmonton. However, we see such extremes in climate, and we run a very intensive operation. So there's been more wear maybe over time than we had expected. Now, that said, the past 18 years have provided a lot of lessons learned to our system, and we are very actively incorporating those lessons learned into our system so that we're not back in 20 years, so that we're back in 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, that sort of thing. There were also some sort of technological changes that have occurred in the past 20 years. For example, LEDs were not really in common use around the time Blue Line was built, and so our signals are all incandescent. And as we know, from a reliability standpoint, from an energy use standpoint, even from a visibility standpoint, LEDs are going to be a superior product. So now's the time to upgrade. And that's the sort of technology question, roll of the dice maybe, that's very hard to predict, at any time. Incandescents were state of the art basically at the time, state of the practice, now LEDs are, and it's time to make that next step up and make improvements to the railroad. Does that provide sufficient context?
That was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Pacheco?
Yes, and I was just actually commenting on what was said earlier or asked earlier, and is this common to have maybe one bid or no bids? And I'm meeting next week with Hennepin County, and they had out for bid landscaping. Now, I know there's a few landscapers that are Latino, but they have none. And so we're looking at why and where, and we brought a few of our businesses in and saying, and most of them are busy right now. They're working hard, and the work's out there, so it's not just not showing up. But there are some other things that can be addressed, and One of them, I think the Department of Transportation did not long ago was break up major projects. And so it's maybe something that we can look to do again and similarly as the county, and therefore have some of the smaller companies be able to compete at the lower level, but also build the capacity and bonding and other things that they didn't have before going in there. One government contract can help the summer out while letting them expand. And the other thing is, what I get is, we can do the work, but we don't have a back of the house. I'm doing the work, so I'm not here to, fill out all the forms and do all this. So we're looking at what can make that easier.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments? All right, I'd entertain a motion then to approve business item 2022-205.
So move.
Moved by Councilmember Gonzalez. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Pacheco. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion carries. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Next, we're on to business item 2022-146, which is the 2022 Budget Amendment. We have Ed Petrie and Heather Aagesen-Huebner here. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair, committee members. Ed Petrie, Director of Finance with Metro Transit.
And Heather Aagesen-Huebner, Director of Finance for Metropolitan Transportation Services.
So I believe, Chair, the next two items will be up with us, so I hope you brought your popcorn, and we have a lot to go through this evening. So the first item that we're going to go through is business item 2022-146 JT. This is a second 2022 budget amendment for the second quarter. I'll go through the information from Metro Transit, take any questions, then turn it over to Heather, who will then answer for Metropolitan Transportation Services. So first off, for Metro Transit, we have, for the items that we have this evening, the first item is for an administrative adjustment. It is an adjustment within one of the projects. It's the I-94 Manning project, where we are just adjusting the type of money that is within the project to follow the expenditures that we need to finalize within that project. It's no change in the overall scope of the project. It's just changing two different types of money. The other item is a closing and adjustment of our project. It is for the F line. When we originally set the F line up, we just set it up as a general project. Now we're going to set it up as a federalized project. So we're moving the dollars from a general F line project down to a federal F line project. So we can just track the costs and monitor the costs as they're going forward. Once again, there is no change in the total dollars in that project, just an adjustment for administrative purposes. The meat of the amendment this evening from Metro Transit is our largest portion of the amendment. It looks a little daunting. There's a lot of projects, but what we are doing this evening is, as you recall, every other year, when funding does become available, we then move the projects from the council's adopted CIP into the capital budget. So the funding has now become available, so that's what we are doing this evening, moving projects from the CIP that you adopted back in December now into the capital budget. I'll go over some of the major adjustments that we're moving this evening or recommending this evening. First of all, it's for the B line. We're recognizing CMAQ funds for both station construction and technology construction in the Lake and Marshall corridor. So we're recognizing those federal funds, bringing that in. We also have a number of projects that have funding has become available. Those include camera trailer refurbishments, LRT state of good repair projects, as you heard earlier this evening. We have tire lease for our buses. We have non-revenue vehicles and support equipment, which would include like staff vehicles, police vehicles, those types of items. We have a number of facility energy enhancement projects. We have a hoist replacements. We have both enhancements to both our public and our support facilities that would come forward this evening. We're going to be replacing 18 of our 60-foot articulated buses. We have building security system projects and fare box replacements. As I stated earlier, that the funding has now become available, so we're recommending those projects move from the CIP into the capital budget. And with that, Madam Chair, committee members, I would stand for any questions on the Metro Transit portion.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What do we do with our retiring articulated buses? Is there an aftermarket?
I'll turn it over to Brian Funk from Bus Operations.
See, this is the risk of in-person meetings. You can just get called to the audience, from the audience.
Hi, Madam Chair and Councilmember Brian Funk, Chief Operating Officer. The articulated buses in our case have met their useful life. We typically run them to a point that there's not a strong aftermarket. They're sold largely to, through the state auction website. Their end purpose is sometimes unknown, but largely they're used for scrap or cannibalizing for other parts. But we're making really good use of them, and we try to retain parts that we need or things that are in short supply with like buses that we still may be operating near the end of their life.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for the Blue Line Station renovation. There are changes to the customer waiting area on the platform. What are those changes?
Okay. Somebody from ENF? Can you assist on that?
I apologize, I was responding to something else, I missed the question.
I can, Chair, repeat?
Go ahead.
Okay, my question is for the renovation design for the Lake Street
Yeah.
platform. There were customer waiting changes. What are those changes and why were those changes made?
On the Lake Street, Jim Harwood, Assistant Director, Indirect Construction. On the Lake Street Blue Line station?
Blue Line.
So the money that's in the budget amendment for Lake Street Blue Line is specific to design, looking to renovate the station. We are still kind of scoping at this point what those changes will be, but it is yet undefined what they will fully be.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. I was just, Chair, just wondering if it was to improve customer service or public safety or anything like that.
Madam Chair and Council Member, it is all of those things. The goals are really looking at what's coming out of some of our CX 360 work related to public safety, related to reliability, all of those things in terms of, and just to really blend in with the surrounding adjacent uses better in terms of how the station functions.
Great, thanks.
All right, any additional questions, comments? All right, turn it back to Heather this time.
Madam Chair, council members, the MTS Budget Amendment, it's a pretty straightforward one. So we're doing three primary things with this amendment. The first is we're going to bring in just under $4 million for the suburban opt-out providers. And what we do is every year, all the providers in the region earn federal formula dollars. Metro Transit Family of Services earns those dollars. MTS Family of Services earns those dollars. So do the suburban transit provider opt-outs. So what we do is we basically defederalize those dollars. It makes it easier and for the suburban transit providers, it makes it easier administrative for us. All in all, everybody seems to be pretty happy with that situation. So there's a federal formula. You put in basically all the different unit measures from information we all enter into a federal system, and that kind of pops out a formula. That formula was principles for that formula was adopted by the council in 2001. It's posted on the website. So now is the time of year where we're going to bring in those dollar amounts into the ACP, and we put them in what we call an undesignated account, and then the suburban providers are able to draw down on those funds through grant agreements when they're ready for their projects. Otherwise, they would submit a project and then they'd have to wait for a budget amendment. We'd have to keep bringing these dollars in piecemeal, so we just bring it in all in one chunk as soon as the RTC is available. Second, we're bringing in about $2.8 million in federal funds and a $700,000 council match for an MBTA Burnsville bus garage project. This is the second or third time that the council has provided a local match to major federal awards to support this MBTA project. This project was in the CIP. The third is we're bringing in just over $1 million to complete some small bus buys. So we've got about 300 small bus buys that were in the CIP and already in the ACP. We've decided that we'd like to add some additional fire suppression safety equipment on these small bus purchases. So we're asking for an additional $1 million to add that onto these purchases that are bus buys that are already in process. This was not in the program CIP, but we do feel it's an important operator and customer safety feature that we'd like to move forward with. On the operating side of our amendment, we're doing a swap. It's one of these things that we talk about a lot. We're authorizing $515,000 of MVEST revenues to be transferred from our contracted services operating budget to the capital program, and an equal amount to be transferred in federal funds from the capital program to our contracted services operating budget. MVEST funds will be used in the capital program for engines, transmissions, midlife vehicle rehabilitations, and suburban transit provider projects that aren't bond eligible. This dollar-for-dollar exchange of funds has no impact on regional MVEST allocations, MVEST reserves, or planned capital projects. This budget amendment demonstrates commitment towards asset preservation and also supports the Thrive outcomes of stewardship by assessing the future needs, responsible planning, and management of resources for both Metro Transit and Metropolitan Transportation Services. Our requested action is that the Council authorize the 2022 unified budget as indicated and in accordance with the attached tables. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on the MTS portion of the amendment.
Okay, thank you. Questions from council members? Councilmember Gonzalez.
Just a question mostly out of curiosity. Was there a particular incident that prompted this interest on the fire suppression on the bus?
Madam Chair, council members, yes, there was.
Okay.
There was a bus that started on fire. Driver was safe, customers were safe, and it also led us to take a look at what, if anything, there would be able to do to basically enhance the safety of both our operators and our drivers. I don't know, Charles, if there's anything else any more background you may have.
Any information on the cause? Was it a mechanical issue on the bus or?
Director Carlson.
Yeah, Madam Chair, council member, I believe the incident actually was one that we had shared with the council. It was somewhat high profile in the news, where a bus was involved in a collision on Highway 169. A truck made contact with the bus as it was going down the highway, or with another car, and then our bus ran into that bus. I think the preliminary theory is that the collision, hitting a car that had stopped, unexpectedly as a result of a second collision, actually created a short across the battery, and that's what then started a fire on that bus. And so these countermeasures are something we can do to enhance the safety and to protect these assets should an event like that occur again.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, additional questions, Councilmember Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a follow-up to that, is this a lesson that now we will incorporate these additional safety measures into going forward rather than doing it after the fact?
Yeah, Madam Chair, council member, I think certainly it's an investment we see as worthwhile, particularly in the small bus market, and so that's what this amendment reflects.
Good, thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I may add, just to be clear, this is for new bus purchases. It's not retrofitting the existing fleet.
Yeah.
So as part of the base package of new small bus buys.
Thank you.
All right, any additional questions or comments? All right, then I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2022-146, a joint committee item.
Come on.
By Councilmember Fredson, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Ed, Heather, and let you kick off the next one where we move to our information items. Quickly before we do that, I would think item 1 can probably go consent to the full council, but the second item obviously will go non-consent. Everyone agrees?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right.
And Madam Chair, if
There you
I could, I'll introduce this item. So we remain in unprecedented times, and this budget for next year certainly reflects the uncertainty that we continue to feel. So with the pandemic continuing, we face significant challenges and unanswered questions about transit service, both near and long term. We're seeing increased demand for transit. We're seeing ridership slowly grow. And we want to prepare for that. So the 2023 budget focuses on investments in the customer experience. It focuses on security, facility upkeep, and technology improvements. The budget is also balanced through the availability of programmed federal relief dollars and through the use of reserves. We have a number of ongoing risks that we're tracking, and we'll hear more detail in here, but briefly, motor vehicle sales tax, our largest funding source, has performed well during the pandemic. It remains volatile, We budget at 95% to hedge against that volatility, but rising interest rates and continued supply chain issues could impact receipts from that. It's our biggest funding source. We're closely tracking ridership. This impacts fare revenue and particularly for Metro Mobility service levels. So we respond to service levels with that service. Operator hiring continues to be an important variable for our ability to provide all of our services. So that remains a key factor. We see increased expenses across all of our services due to supply chain issues, beyond transit even. We also see big impacts from fuel prices. So rising or falling fuel prices impact MTS budget immediately. So we feel them as we're paying as we go. Metro Transit uses fuel price hedging for budget certainty, but what it means is high prices we see today will actually experience the cost of later on. So we continue to monitor and evaluate our ridership impacts from the pandemic, really on a daily basis, and continue to plan for service adjustments reflecting all of these different things. And so there's various assumptions in the budget that offsets these risks, both positive and negative. But we do remain in an uncertain position given all these different dynamics that we face. So despite these uncertainties, our short-term financial picture is strong. We have federal relief funds. We have strong performance of our largest funding source, the motor vehicle sales tax, and we have healthy reserve balances. And so that allows us, despite the uncertainty, to advance this budget with confidence, and we'll be positioned as necessary to adjust should the need arise. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to Ed and to Heather to help the dollars make more sense.
All right.
It's a challenge, Charles.
Yeah, Chair, committee members, grab your popcorn. We'll try and, I know sometimes budget presentations can get a little long. We're going to try and give you some story along with it. Many of you are quasi-experts in this. I feel like many of you have heard this multiple times from us, and we'll try and add as much detail as we can. We'll go through kind of a high-level overview of the Transportation Division first. Then Ed will cover some Metro Transit specifics. I'll cover some MTS specifics. So that's the general outline of the presentation. Feel free to let us know if you have questions along the way. So as you know, the council budget does not happen in a single month. This is our first stop before you. We're quite early in the process yet. Kind of between the summer, late spring, early summer months, as divisions and as staff, we're really putting together the preliminary budget, taking a look at what the assumptions are, figuring out what adjustments we need to make. Then this is the first time we're really bringing it to you to talk about what we think that looks like for 2023. In August, there'll be a full council presentation where you'll see all the preliminary budgets together. You'll also be asked to adopt the preliminary budget and levies. In October, we'll be talking more about the capital program, and you'll be asked to adopt the public comment draft budget, or excuse me, that budget will be released. And then in December, the final budget will be adopted. By statute, what we're presenting is the regional administrator's recommended budget, and then we bring that to the council for formal approval. I'm not going to read the statute, but that is up here on the slide. A quick recap of our family of services. On the Metro Transit side, there's kind of the base bus. There's the blue and the green line LRTs, North Star Commuter Rail, our family of BRT and ABRT lines, and our capital program development work. On the Metropolitan Transportation Services side, we have our contracted bus. If there's a bus that's running for Metro Transit or MTS, you won't be able to tell the difference on the street. They operate the same. Service development creates the same plans. They're just a different operator model. We have our Metro Mobility ADA service, our planning services, that's the transportation planning. We have Transit Link service and Metro Van Pool. So you're very used to seeing the items on the screen right now, but I'll quickly highlight that when we build our budget, we implement council policy and actions that you've already taken. We also look multiple years forward with forecasts. What we look forward as we take a look at some really long-term strategic planning documents that the council adopts. That includes the Thrive MSP 2040 and the Transportation Policy Plan. We also look at multi-year labor agreements for staff salaries. We look at contracted services contracts for those rates. We take a look at what we know we have in federal relief funds, and we ensure that we're building target fund balances in alignment with council policy. That makes putting all of these things together, it helps us be in a really good space to have really strong financial management. It helps us weather difficult times. It helps make sure we can ensure that we have cash flow. Some of the high-level forecasts and legislation that we track really closely is when we build this budget, we're not only looking at what's happening in '23, but we're looking what's happening over the next handful of years. We call that the forecast or the toolbox. That's how we make sure that we're taking a look at what's going to be happening with our revenue, what's going to be happening with our expenses, what are those core assumptions that we're going to be building in '23 and beyond. As Charles mentioned, we're always taking a really close eye on what's happening with motor vehicle sales tax. We take a look at what the state releases in their forecast, and that forecast is what we build off until the forecast changes. There's 2 forecasts a year. So what you're seeing in the preliminary budget this year is the February forecast. There'll be a November forecast, and we'll adjust at that time as needed. We take a look at what's in current law with the state general fund appropriation. Again, we have our federal relief funds from the 3 buckets of COVID federal relief. And in the forecast, we're always taking a look at what's coming up next. And there's not a budget impact you're going to see in the '23, but I just want to highlight that we're doing work for when Metro Mobility becomes a state forecasted program in state fiscal year '26. So as I just noted, our budget supports Thrive MSP 2040. In particular, we really look to preserve service while growing and rebuilding ridership across the region. We know there's a lot of challenges with this right now, but this is really how we're trying to advance 2040. We look at structural solutions over time. Most notably in this budget, you're going to see that with planned use of reserves and COVID federal relief funds. And we work to mitigate our impact on the council levies and maintain reserves at policy levels. With that, I'll hand it over to Ed for a few slides.
Okay, I'll go through a few more slides. First of all, for the budget framework considerations, when we pull together our budget, first of all, we roll up the budget by the major revenues and expense categories. What that means is we take every individual department, whether they're a revenue generating department or expense department, we'll roll up all of their, for example, salaries into one salary budget for the overall division. We also forecast the anticipated revenue growth. As Heather mentioned, we get the motor vehicle sales tax twice a year, a forecast from the state of Minnesota in February and in November. We're basing our budget tonight on the February forecast. In November, the state of Minnesota will come out with a brand new motor vehicle sales tax forecast that we will then come to you then in the month of December and let you know if there's any changes or any modifications we have to make and recommend into the 2023 budget before you finally adopt it in December. We also look at our length of service. We also look at base and expansion service. We have our base service across the system, whether it's bus, light rail, Metro Mobility, but then we also have expansion service, for example, like the D line. The D line will be one of our BRT lines that will be opening in December of 2022. We have now layered that into the 2023 budget. As we've been talking about over the last couple years, we also have COVID impact in operations. We've had it on the expense side and on the revenue side. On the expense side, we've incurred a lot of costs for cleaning, maintenance, vehicles, stations, platforms, those types of items. All those are an eligible cost to be reimbursed by the federal relief funds. We're also then tracking the lost revenue that we've had. We compare what our revenue is, what we're forecasting compared to pre-COVID times. We're then tracking that and using the federal relief funds then to offset that revenue decline. We've also gone through a review of transit equity during our budget process and reviewing to make sure that we are hitting the equity goals. And as Heather also mentioned too, we have an increasing investment in both the customer experience, security, the facility upkeep, and technology. And we'll be talking about that in more detail in some of the future slides. Some of the things that we do within our budget, though, is we try to mitigate volatility. Because if the fact is that you have your one-year budget, but we have our four-year forecast, we're always looking at items that we can do to mitigate volatility because it takes a long time to change. For example, if we were to hit a budget problem, you know, if we were to look at whether it's a fare reduction, or fare increase, service reductions, that all takes a lot of time. So we have to forecast out as strongly as we can to mitigate volatility. The first thing is motor vehicle sales tax. When we went on to motor vehicle sales tax back in 2008, I believe it was, prior to that point in time, we received property taxes as our main source of revenue. The legislature switched us over to motor vehicle sales tax. And Heather and I many times will joke about that. The fact is what we want our customers to do is, you know, buy an expensive SUV, pay the sales tax, park it in the garage, and hop on transit. It's an odd, it's an odd sales tax, or it's odd tax that we are on, but it's what we have. Due to the volatility of motor vehicle sales tax, as you would assume, as the economy ebbs and flows, during the good times, people are spending money, they're buying vehicles, motor vehicle sales tax is high. When the economy starts to soften, motor vehicle sales tax will drop. But one of the challenges we have now is because of COVID also is the fact is that interest rates are going up, supply is going down because there's a lot of the computer chips and those types of items that fortunately have not hit us yet. We're seeing the motor vehicle sales tax is still holding, but we're very concerned. So the council actually budgets 95% of the motor vehicle sales tax forecast. Anything we receive in excess of that will then go into a motor vehicle sales tax reserve to be used in the future year operations. And you'll see that in a couple slides coming forward. Fuel price hedging, as Charles had mentioned, the Council Metro Transit, we're the largest consumer of diesel fuel in the state of Minnesota, approximately 7 million gallons of diesel fuel on an annualized basis. So we actually lock in through fuel forward pricing or hedging, we lock in about 90% of our consumption over the next 24 months. And we do that for fuel price certainty. So the prices that you're seeing right now at today's, you know, at the gas station when you purchase fuel, Metro Transit, we're not experiencing that yet because we've locked in our prices for the next 24 months. But what we're going to see is as those contracts now are coming due, every month we're renewing contracts. So they're being renewed at the higher rate. So one of the things I was very happy to see this weekend on CNN when I was watching is that they're forecasting fuel prices are beginning to drop again. So that is a relief, but we will come forward and be talking to you probably in the year 2025, late 24, early 25 about increases in diesel fuel as contracts are renewing. We've talked about we're programming federal funds. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then we also have the operating fund reserves that we have to maintain, basically 8.3% of our operating expenses. We want to maintain it in reserve levels. So some of the ongoing risks that we're continuing to track also within our budget is ridership and travel demand. Ever since we've gone into this, we've always tracked ridership and travel demand, but especially now since we're coming out of COVID or coming through COVID operations and coming out of COVID, we're watching very closely what ridership is, where the ridership is strong, and really watching what the travel demand needs to be and if we need to make any adjustments to that travel demand. As you would assume, any adjustments to ridership, that also impacts our passenger fares. So we're actually watching, like I mentioned, watching that very closely. We talked about motor vehicle sales tax volatility. Operator hiring, as many of you are aware, we've had a challenge with operator hiring. That is impacting both bus operations and also light rail operations because the operators on light rail come from the operator on bus side ranks and they move over to light rail. So it is a challenge on both bus operations and light rail. Fuel prices, as we will talk about, our fuel price last year in this year in our 2022 budget is $1.77. Fuel price that we're forecasting now for 2023 is $2.44. It's a huge increase for us, but compared to the tank or price that you're seeing at your holiday gas station, we're significantly lower, but we will see that coming forward. We've talked about COVID impact in operations, and as you would assume, the other thing with tracking ongoing risks is we're continually reviewing and evaluating our budget assumptions. Every time we get a new state of Minnesota forecast, we're re-looking at the assumptions, and so it's a continuous effort for us. Revenue assumptions, as we've talked about on the revenue side, State General Fund and Invest, they're both per legislation from the state of Minnesota. State General funds are basically used for metro mobility and rail operations. Motor vehicle sales tax is used on the bus side. One of the things that we're recommending with our revenue assumptions in the 2023 budget is a resetting of the county contributions at a 50% subsidy level. As many of you are aware, we do have a 5-year master operating funding agreement with the counties for funding the operating subsidy for both light rail and commuter rail, and also for the Orange Line. That is set at a base price from 2018 and inflated every year. The contribution inflates 3.15%. But as we are seeing over the last year to 2 years, expense increases are significantly increasing. Whether it's on parts, diesel fuel, utilities, all those types of items, they are far exceeding the 3.15%. So one of the things that there's an option within the contract that we can then ask for a reopening of the contract. So that is one of the things I've been working with Leslie and with Wes on, and with our legal department, and we're going to be sending out a letter within the next day or two to the counties asking for a reopening of the master funding agreement. And that is one of the causes within the agreement that we can ask for if there are significant cost increases. So we want to have that discussion with the counties. As we talked about programming federal relief funds, we're using that to offset revenue loss and also to offset any cost increases. Passenger ridership recovery. This is one of the things that Charles had mentioned also, is the fact that we are slowly seeing a recovery in ridership. And what we're seeing as a bus system, we're looking at, we'll have about a 65% recovery next year. We're currently running at about a 50 to 55%, so we're narrowing in on that 65. Light rail, we're looking at about 75% recovery from pre-COVID times. We're currently running at about 50-55% also. Metro Mobility is at 100%. Their service has been very, very strong. North Star, we're looking at a recovery next year, or hoping for a recovery at about 30%. On the expense side, as we've talked about, we have all of our different service levels, whether it's on Metro Transit bus, light rail, commuter rail, Metro Mobility, and the TransLink van pool. On our bus system, we're looking at service levels next year of approximately 95%, plus the D line, which would then give us at about a 98% of a pre-COVID level. So it's almost back to what pre-COVID levels. One of the precursors, once again, I will add to this, is the fact that it's all dependent upon operator hiring. As you are aware that we are adjusting service, as we mentioned earlier, in the month of August, we're going to take our bus system down to around 75%, and our rail system will be at about 80%. Once again, it's based upon operator hiring. Our budget, though, we're hopeful, and we are going to be budgeting at the levels that we want to operate if we had the operators. So we're looking at bus system, once again, at the 95% plus D-line, which would get us at about 98% pre-COVID levels. Light rail at 100%. North Star, we're looking at a service next year of 4 trips in and out. That is what our budget is this year. Right now, we're currently running 2 trips in, 2 trips out. We're looking at increasing that to 4 trips in and out next year, plus special event service. Metro Mobility would be, I believe, 100%. And then with the Transit Link and Van Pool following the same as bus. On the other part of the expense side, all of our expenses are following existing contracts that we have with salaries and benefits, for example, like the ATU, the LELS for police, et cetera. We have our contracts for the contracted service, and we do also have the fuel forward pricings we talked about. Our service plan is really the driver of a lot of our costs in our budget. Service plan will then drive the number of hours and miles of service that we're going to operate, but then from that, we then calculate the number of operators we need, mechanics, fuel, parts, cleaners, suppliers, those types of staff. That's all based off of the service plan. We have a number of transit safety initiatives that we have talked about previously that we're going to continue, and then our regional allocation, which is for all the shared services coming from Robert Street, which would include like the chair's office, budget department, payroll, accounts payable, those types of departments, IS, those are all included within our budget. Federal relief funds, Heather talked about that earlier. As you recall, we were the recipient of 3 different lettings of federal relief funds. Very happy to get that the council received a total of just over $725 million in the federal relief funds from ARP, CRISA, and CARES. Of that total, about $686 million of that is for council operations. The balance is for the regional providers. We currently are planning about $48 million of federal relief funds in the 2023 budget. And again, these funds were awarded to the council based upon Federal Formula 5307 funds, with an emphasis on payroll and transit operating expenses. We have to follow the federal rules, and in fact, we've already been audited twice already this year Earlier this year, we just received a notice, Metro Transit did about a week and a half ago, of a second audit for the federal funds. So we know they're watching us very closely. And fortunately, though, with the federal refunds, and like Charles had mentioned, with the federal funds and with the reserves that we have built, we're able to balance ourselves with our fiscal cliff. We estimate right now, as of this point in time, that we can balance ourselves through approximately calendar year 2026. There's a lot riding on that, though. There's a lot of assumptions built into that. The motor vehicle sales tax is one of the assumptions. Ridership is another one of the assumptions. So there's some big target items that could adjust that 2026 target either way.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Wasn't sure if you had a question, but.
Okay. Ridership. So this is council ridership for the transportation division. It's kind of daunting when you look at it. You can see 2010 through 2019, we were running very, very strong. To give you just like a placeholder feel, in 2019, the ridership was approximately 82 million rides. Everything was good, then all of a sudden, spring of 2020, COVID hit. In 2020, our ridership was about 32 million rides. Our 2023 budget is, so you can see the slow increase in ridership. We're forecasting in 2023 at about 58 million rides, or at about 70% of pre-COVID levels. So we're slowly seeing the recovery. Very happy to see the recovery, but it's kind of a daunting slide, Madam Chair, when you see it, but also you do see the recovery coming. Okay, now we get into the fun part of the budget where we're going to start talking some numbers. This is the part that Heather and I enjoy the most. Okay, the 2023 budget for the Transportation Division is $717 million. You can we have the revenues on the left side, the expenses on the right-hand side. As you would assume on the right-hand side, or left-hand side, excuse me, motor vehicle sales tax, it is our largest source of revenue for the Transportation Division, about 45%. You then see the state funding, which is state appropriations, which would be for the light rail and commuter rail and metro mobility operations. You see our planned use of reserves. Like we said, we do our transit forecasting, and per that transit forecasting, we have a planned use to reserves of about 6% or $43 million next year. We have county funding in there to fund the subsidy on Blue Line, Green Line, North Star Commuter Rail, and the Orange Line. And D Line also, excuse me. And then we have fares at about 12% next year. The planned fund transfer, that's at 5% we talked about. We budget for 95% of the motor vehicle sales tax. Anything in excess of that will then go into reserve to be used in the following year's operations. We're using about $49 million is 7% of our budget. So we're using last year's over collections above 95. We'll use it in 2023. We have our federal funds, which is largely the federal relief funds and some expenses that are going to be salaries that are going to be paid for by federal funds and some CMAQ dollars. And then all other, the $5 million is mainly advertising. You see all the bus side advertising, rail side advertising. That'll generate about $5 million. On the expense side, you see the family of the transit services. Metro Transit Bus is the largest one. We're about $425 million of the budget, or about 59%. You see the Metro Transit Capital. That is people's salaries that are actually working on some of the capital projects, for example, like the Blue Line or the Southwest Line. Their salaries, we show it here, but then they'll be paid for with project dollars. The Blue Line, excuse me, has a budget next year about $51 million. Green Line 52, the two sister systems. North Star is in at a budget of about $17 million. Metro Mobility, $102 million. And then we have the Transit Link of about $29 million. I'm planning at 11. And as Charles mentioned earlier, our budget is balanced at $717 million with the use of the federal funds and with the planned use of reserves for our transportation, our multi-year forecast. So now I will move into the Metro Transit family of services.
Let me just check, see if anyone has any questions real quick. Councilmember Cummings?
Absolutely.
Madam Chair, I have a couple of questions, actually. First of all, I'm wondering what the impact was when it was switched from property taxes to MFEST.
Madam Chair, committee members, fortunately, what we have forecasted right now, motor vehicle sales tax since the beginning of time has run at about 98% of the state forecast, between 98 to 99%. So it's pretty well been right on target with what the state of Minnesota has forecasted. And we've also seen growth over the years with motor vehicle sales tax.
So that worked. part.
It has been a positive for us.
To our advantage to
Yes.
switch from property
Yeah.
taxes, even though we see our property taxes going insane.
But Madam Chair, committee members, one thing I would just like to add though is, like I mentioned too, that is, it's a concerning tax. As the fact is that as the economy turns, that is one of the items that could turn versus the property taxes normally stay stable and or move up.
Right, okay. Good, thank you. Then I'm curious too, when you talked back about being able to possibly reopen the contract with the county contributions based at 50% net subsidy. I'm trying to understand, did you say that you request that that gets reopened, or according to the contract as is currently written, you can say, we're reopening this? Or are you asking of the counties for permission to reopen that, or how does that work?
Madam Chair, committee members, very good question. In the contract, there's actually a section in the contract that is called reopening conditions. And it basically says that they list 6 different items that could be reopeners, whether you have a new line starting, a major change in state funding, or if you have, like, for example, significant increase in costs. If any one of those things happen, we have the ability, or the counties have the ability, to ask for a reopening of the contract. The parties agree to meet in good faith, talk about whatever the conditions are. It doesn't guarantee that they will pay, but it basically says that both parties will agree to meet in good faith and discuss the items.
Follow up, thank you. Then do all of the counties have to agree to the terms that have been negotiated in good faith, or can somebody say that this is simply not okay and the other counties say, yeah, we'll go along with that?
Madam Chair, committee members, another very good question. The parties to the contract right now are Hennepin County, Ramsey County, Anoka County, and the council. So all 4 parties will come to the table. All 4 parties have to agree because they are all signatories on that agreement.
Thank you, thank you.
And I've got a follow-up question to all of that. So is that process something that'll impact the 2023 budget potentially, or not until really 2024? Like the
Madam Chair, committee members, very good question also. Our current master funding agreement was a 5-year agreement that started on December 1st or January 1st of 2018, and will go through December 31st of 2022. Per the agreement, per the current master funding agreement, it automatically will renew at the current terms, and it would just keep going in perpetuity at 3.15% increase every year, unless somebody requests a reopening condition. So it will impact. So right now we're fine for 2022. We've re-asked for that. We're going to re-ask for this reopening for calendar year 2023.
All right, thank you. All right, additional questions? Councilmember Gonzalez.
Just a quick one on the issue of tracking the ridership. And I understand that we're keeping an eye on that and all the steps that we're taking to increase ridership. But I'm just wondering about how fine-grained is the analysis of the reasons why the ridership is increasing right now. Is it simply because the COVID pandemic it's quote-unquote over and people are just going back to work? Are there any of the measures that we're taking, like our safety and other things, having an impact already? Or is there a way in which we can track not just that the ridership is increasing, but the actual reasons why?
Madam Chair, committee.
Go ahead.
Okay, Madam Chair, committee members. I'll answer and I'll let then Leslie jump in also then. One of the things as far as for the tracking of the ridership, what we're actually doing is we actually track the ridership by the different types, whether it's local service, suburban local service, express service, BRT, light rail, commuter rail. So we're breaking it down to that. And then when we break down those respective, like for example, local service, we're able then to track the ridership down to the respective lines, whether it's the 5, the 16, or whatever the case would be, by stop and also by time of day. So we're tracking it and trying to see where we're seeing the increases and or whatever the impacts would be. If we're seeing, for example, overloads on some of the services, that's one of the things where we can then look at what our service demand model is and say, we're seeing overloads, for example, on the 5 line between these periods of time. Then we can then look at adjusting service to meet those additional demands. And did you want to add some additional?
Well, I'll just say, Chair Barber, Councilmember Gonzalez, we haven't, I don't know the date off the top of my head, but we'll be bringing the quarterly ridership report to you probably in the next month or so. And I think we can share with the researchers who put that together the interest in understanding some of the underlying dynamics that we think might be influencing ridership. I mean, certainly travel in general has picked up, and I think we can ask our research staff at least to really come prepared to talk about some of the factors we think are leading to that.
Just a quick follow-up. It's just, for example, the safety concerns we're talk about that. So if the steps that we're taking are having an impact, will that be captured? That is because of people feel more safe. That's one of the ingredients that are leading to an increase in ridership. I guess that type of fine-grained analysis.
Well, Chair Barber, Councilmember Gonzalez, I'll mention on the safety front, certainly as part of the Safety and Security Action Plan that the Council endorsed back in June, we have measures in there about trying to get better data from our customers, more, so we can start looking at that. So I would say the short answer is we're not at a point today where we'd be able to point to customer feedback relating to safety and how it is driving ridership right now, but I think we're putting the pieces into place where we'll maybe have a better answer for that.
Excellent, thank you.
And one quick question follow-up. When is we saw the pilot numbers for the transit onboard survey. Do you know when the next one? That would be good to know too, because that gets to some more of the detail that you're asking about, I think. Yeah.
I don't know off the top of my head, but we can.
Okay, all right. Any other questions, comments? Councilmember Fredson?
Thank you, Chair. Just one idea would be to include the percentages for expenses and revenue compared to last year. Okay. And I'm assuming that expenses by percent are relatively similar. Maybe there's growth in metro mobility that is greater than the year before. My assumption when it comes to revenue is there was more federal resources coming in. I just think it would be interesting to kind of compare percent to percent. Madam Chair, committee members, you're previewing what we'll have in a couple slides. We're actually going to break down for both the bus system, light rail, commuter rail, and the MTS family services. We'll compare the expenses last year to this year and what the major drivers are and major changes. Thanks.
Okay. Any additional questions, comments? All right, turn it back to you guys.
Okay, thank you very much. Strategic Operations Plan. This is something that Metro Transit has been working on over the last year and a half. We have our goals, we have our core elements of our strategic operations. I'm not going to read them all, but we've talked to you previously about these. We've actually done a presentation on this, talking about an update. And I believe we're going to be coming, Leslie, probably in the next month or two with an update of our strategic operations, both goals and core elements. Okay, so now let's move into some of the modes of transit. First of all, talk about Metro Transit bus operations, some of our highlights that we're incorporating into the 23 budget. First of all, we're opening the D line, as I mentioned, in December of 2022. We're planning bus level services at 95% plus the D line, so that'll equate to about a 98% of pre-COVID levels. We're opening the Minneapolis Bus Garage, or it's called the North Loop Bus Garage. We'll be opening that for revenue service sometime early in 2023. Continuing our work on the zero emission bus fleet plan. As you would assume, we have a continued focus on both bus and light rail for the operator hiring plans. COVID impacts, continuous evaluation of our budgets. As you would assume, we also have FTE additions that are in our budget for next year for both D-line annualization, the North Loop Bus Garage, and for the Orange Line. And we also then have county funding for the Orange Line. So the Metro Transit family of services is a budget of about $425 million. That is budget or balanced. You can see on the left-hand side, the largest portion of revenues is motor vehicle sales tax, about 68% of our budget. You don't see any state appropriations on bus. It's motor vehicle sales tax is our state source. We have a planned use of reserves of about $22 million. We have county funding about $2.8 million, which is for the Orange Line. Fares of about 12% next year at $52 million. That fund transfer, which is the excess collected over the 95% on motor vehicle sales tax of $49 million. Federal relief funds of about just over $6 million. And the other revenues of about just over $3 million would be the advertising revenues. The expense side, as you would assume, we're a very labor-intensive budget. About 77% of our budget is salaries and benefits. We have materials and supplies of about $22 million, utilities of $5 million, fuel of just under $16 million, and then regional allocations for shared services of about $52 million. In addition to just the bus budget, we also then have the capital piece of it that I've talked about before. This is for mainly salaries and benefits and some other minor costs that are being paid for through the capital projects. We track the salaries because they will then come in and then they'll be paid for via federal funds and matching funds. And you can see the sources of revenue, about 86% of that would be federal, a slight use of reserves, and then county funding about $1.9 million. So here, the chaired committee members, this is the first one for Metro Transit budget. Our preliminary budget right now is showing about a 10% increase over 2022. And one would say, well, that looks, it's a large amount. But one of the things that we also did is we actually looked at what the budgets were and what they included and looked at what was above base inflation of 3.15% to try to see where there's some parameters and drivers that were pushing that budget increase. The first one is federal indirect rates. We actually have an A87 rate, which is a federal rate that allows us to charge overhead salaries to both operating and capital projects. This is a rate that is approved every year by the federal government. We turn in our costs, a cost report, if you will. They then approve the rate that allows us to charge costs to the federal projects and get reimbursed on the capital side. This rate is changed every year, but it also has a 2-year rolling period on it, 2-year roll forward. So as you could recall, back in 2020 and 2021, our budgets went down. So as a result, we were not charging as much out on the federal rates. So as a result, we have the 2-year catch-up period right now that's going to impact now our 2023 budget. So it's increasing our federal rate from 28 to 34%. I would anticipate probably in the next year or two, that'll start dropping back down to the 28% rate. But because of the reduction in budget 2 years ago, we have that catch-up period and it'll drop itself back down. We have base commitments, as we talked about $4 million. That is for both utilities, the opening of the new North Loop bus garage, our electric bus program, and additional 8 FTEs for cleaning and those types of items. We have fuel increase, as I talked about. We're going from $1.73 up to $2.44 a gallon next year, 41% increase. That's about $3 million. We have the service annualization for both of the North Loop garage, but mainly for the D line, because we'll start service for the D line in December 2022. That then will annualize its service then in the 2023 budget. So then we'll have a full year of service next year. We had a slight increase in regional allocations, which is mainly from the IS department for all of our different computer services and maintenance programs. If you adjust for those items, we're just at just under about a 2.8 to about 3% inflation increase, but for those singular one-line items. And I'll go through the same analysis on the light rail and commuter rail in a few minutes. Light rail highlights. As we talked about, starting in August, we're going to reduce down to a 15-minute frequency due to the lack of operators. We're budgeting, though, returning back to full frequency if we can hire the operators. So that's our budget plan for next year, which would return us back to a 10-minute frequency. Like many industries are seeing, we are seeing a significant increase in parts and utilities. Specifically, any type of parts on the light rail vehicles that are computerized or have computer chips in them. We're seeing a significant increase in those parts. We're also looking at hiring 8 additional cleaners for the station and vehicle maintenance programs for additional cleaning on both stations and vehicles. As we talked about earlier tonight, also our light rail system, I still consider it to be a brand new system, but for example, the blue line is going to be 18 years old. So as a result, as you would imagine, we have continued structure maintenance to maintain the assets into a state of good repair. So we have increased costs for that. And then we also then are assuming continued county funding for both Metro Blue and Green lines. So I'll go right now through the light rail. I'll talk about blue and then green. They're virtually the same as far as how their makeup. On the revenue side, you'll see on the left-hand side, it's about a $51 million budget for the blue line. It includes state funding, which would be state appropriations. It's not motor vehicle sales tax. This is state appropriations of about 30%. We're looking at a fare box recovery of about 20% next year, or $10 million. We have use of reserves, planned use of about $1.7 million. of federal relief funds of about 12% or just over $6 million. And then you can see our county funding partner, which would be Hennepin County, in at 34% or just over $17 million. On the expense side, it's similar to the bus operations with a few different changes. First of all, salaries and benefits, once again, the biggest piece, very labor-intensive organization, 48%. Instead of diesel fuel, we have the propulsion costs, which is electricity to run the trains. We have costs in for utilities, the regional allocations, all other costs, which would be mainly advertising and insurance costs. And then we have materials and supplies. And the modal allocation, it's called modal allocation, but that's for costs that we allocate across our between bus, light rail, and commuter rail. The majority of that would be police costs on the light rail system. So that is the blue line. If we move into the green line system, excuse me, it is a similar budget to the blue line, about a $52 million budget. You see the state funds appropriations, again, about 30% or just over $15 million. On the county side, you'll see in addition to Hennepin County, you'll also see Ramsey County. So those are the two counties that fund the net operating subsidy. On the county side for green, we have the federal use funds for the federal relief. Fares in at 23%, about $12 million. Our use of reserves and all other revenues, which would be about $600,000, which would be the advertising. The inside advertising on the rail vehicles and also then the outside advertising. Their expenses are $52 million and are virtually the same type of expenses as you see as we just reviewed on the blue line. Commuter rail, which is North Star Commuter Rail, excuse me again. Its planned service levels next year are 4 trips in and 4 trips out, and with special event service. Especially with North Star, we're continually evaluating the service needs. We're going to be looking very closely at the service needs yet this year and adjusting any budgets or anything that we need in the budgets before the year end. One of the things, Madam Chair, I didn't mention earlier, thank you, Heather. One of the things I did not mention earlier during the budget presentation is Heather and I can both guarantee you we will be coming forward before we adopt the public hearing document and then before we recommend the final budget for adoption in December changes. Because we know things are going to change as we continue to move out of the pandemic, as ridership changes, patterns change, those types of things, motor vehicle sales tax changes, we will bring forward changes. So, but like I mentioned, we're continually evaluating all of our services and especially North Star. They have the same phenomenon that we're seeing on the light rail system, increase in repair parts and utilities due to increased inflation. Thank you, Heather. Also on the North Star, we also have North Star maintenance, just like we do on the light rail system, to keep all the stations and the facility up in Big Lake and all of our stations into a state of good repair. And then we, excuse me, have the county funding for North Star Commuter Rail. So let's look at the North Star Commuter Rail budget next year. It's a $16.9 million budget. On the left-hand side, you see all the various revenues. You'll see the state funds in at about 9% or $1.6 million. You'll see a 5% fare box recovery, about $800,000. Plan use of reserves of $4 million. And then you see the various funding partners for the net operating subsidy. You'll see Hennepin County in at $1.1 million or 6%. You have Anoka County at 27% or $4.6 million. Sherburne County, excuse me, and Greater Minnesota MnDOT, which are both in at about $1.1 million or 7%. And then the federal relief funds of about $2.5 million. On the right-hand side, they have somewhat of a different, they still have a very labor-intensive budget, but they have a different type of expenses than what you've seen on the other ones, the other lines. Salaries and benefits in it about 34% or $5.8 million. You see the regional allocations, the diesel, fuel, all of the costs, which is mainly insurance, and all other costs would be advertising and leases and those types of items. You have supply costs. You have modal allocations, which is mainly police, but then you see the other big one, 18%, that's Burlington Northern. So we pay Burlington Northern, we're anticipating to pay them about $3.1 million. So once the train leaves our Big Lake facility and comes out onto the track, the Burlington Northern staff will then board the train, bring it out onto the federal track, and run it to downtown Minneapolis and back. So that is the $3.1 million. So it's a little different than what the rest of our services look like. The salaries and benefits are mainly all of our mechanics, fuelers, cleaners, and those types of items that are maintaining and keeping the train ready to go, but then BNSF actually operates our trains for us. So it's a budget for $16.9 million. So let's talk about the various committee member. Did you have a question?
Councilmember Fredson?
Thank you, Chair. Did Anoka County finally pay their portion for the 2022 year?
Chair, committee members, a very good question. They have paid, right now they have paid for 2020. They have paid for 2021, and they will be paying a payment towards 2022. We are in negotiations. We're going to be talking with them about what that payment was. It was not enough to fund what we're looking at as full operations for 2022, but they're planning to pay a payment towards 2022 operations. I know our chair did have a meeting with Anoka County, or one of the chair of Anoka County, to discuss that. Now, if Leslie, you want to add any additional
I'll
comments?
just say, I think they're planning to have a meeting. I don't
Oh, they're
think
planning to have the meeting. I apologize. Okay.
Councilmember Cummings?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On that note, I read something in the paper that I didn't understand completely. Perhaps you can clear it up for me. Something about BNSF provided funds back to us with regard to North Star. What was that about? Can you explain that a little bit?
Chair, committee members, very good question. Yes, what happens with BNSF is they give us a planned budget. We pay according to that planned budget for the year. Then what BNS has a 12/31 year end. So they will then close out their year end operations and look at what they've charged Metro Transit and every other entity across that they provide services for. If they have overcharged us, they will provide us a refund. If they have undercharged us, they will bill us. What happened then is when we set the budget in 2020, the budget was set pre-COVID. So we paid according to their budgeted guidelines during 2020. At the end of the year, what happened then during 2020, they did not do as much work and stuff along the line as far as any repairs or those types of items. So as a result, they owed us a refund back, which then we generally received the refund about July of the following year. So for 2020 operations, we received about a $1.4 million refund in July of 2021 for 2020 operations. Now moving forward, they set the rate now in 2021, and we budgeted that, and that is what we paid during 2021 operations. About 3 weeks ago, we received a final true-up bill for 2021 operations now in July of 2022. That bill was just over $600,000. So they actually did a little more maintenance and those types of items than what they had anticipated for 2021. So they billed us now in 2022. So for the 1 year, we received a $1 million credit. The next year, we received a $600,000 bill.
Councilmember Cummings?
Does that money come to Metro Transit and stay with us, or is that parceled out to our partners in some formula?
Chair, committee members, very good question. What happens then is whether we have a surplus or a deficit at the end of the year, or with this also then, we will then disperse it between all the funding partners based upon their percentage of contribution in.
Okay.
Yep,
Thank
so
you.
it's shared with everybody, including the council, Sherburne, MnDOT, Anoka, Hennepin.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any additional questions?
Okay, I will go
ahead.
into this slide quickly, Madam Chair. The rail budget right now is about proposed budget is $120 million. Blue line, we're seeing about a 12% increase for next year. It's going from about a $46 million budget to $51 million. There are items that are up and above that 3.15%. We're seeing a significant increase, like I said, in repair parts of just over $2 million, $600,000 increase in utilities. That would also include the propulsion costs. We're adding 4 cleaners on the blue line for the stations and the vehicles. We talked about the structure maintenance, increased costs to keep all of our structures on the light rail system into a state of good repair. If you adjust for those items, we're at about 2.4% increase for next year. But we have to look at those individual items, which is now one of the reasons why we're going to be asking for a reopening of the contract of the MOFA, because we're seeing these costs that are up and above the norm that we're going to experience, and this is one of the items that are within the reopening conditions that we'd like to exercise. On the green line, it's about an 8.9% increase for next year, going from about a $48 million budget to a $52 million budget. The same thing that you see on the blue line. We have increased in repair parts, utilities. We're adding 4 additional cleaners on the green line, and we have the structure maintenance. If you adjust for all those items, we're at a base of about a 2% increase. But with all those unusual items, it takes us up to almost 9%. North Star budget in this year was about $16.1 million, proposed to increase it next year to about 16.9. It's about a 4.7% increase. This does assume, once again, as I talked about, 4 trips in and out, plus special event service. We are also seeing the additional increased costs and repairs and utilities on the North Star line. And with that, Madam Chair, that's the Metro Transit portion. I would stand for any questions, or we can answer additional questions at the end, and I'll turn it over to Heather.
Pause quickly just to see if there's additional questions. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. I'm curious, back on the slide that talks about revenue and fare revenue on the blue line and the green line, so forth. As we know,
Opened up the green line for you.
there are issues with fare evasion. So this number of anticipated revenue from fare, is that based on the number, what's that based on? Is it the number of people that we know are riding? Is it the number of, is it what we anticipate if everybody paid? Or what? Where does that number come from?
Madam Chair, committee members, how we calculate that is we're actually looking at historically, but also looking at currently what our average fare per passenger is.
Okay.
What we're currently collecting on the system. We will then take that rate and then apply it against the ridership to come up with the fare revenue.
Thank you.
Okay. Additional questions? All right.
I apologize, I talked a long time,
No.
Chair.
We have lots of questions, so we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll transition over to Metropolitan Transportation Services. So as a quick reminder, that includes Metro Mobility, Contracted Base Bus, Transit Link, and Metro Van Pool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about all these programs separately, very similar to how Ed did with the Metro Transit family of services. So our bus levels, I mentioned earlier, if you see an MTS bus on the road, you're not going to know the difference between the Metro Transit and Metro or MTS buses. So they look the same, service levels are the same. There are times when we move routes between MTS and Metro Transit, so making sure that we all have the same assumptions makes it pretty seamless from a council perspective. Metro Mobility service levels, as Ed mentioned before, are currently programmed at 100%. Metro Mobility ridership has been increasing, and now we're kind of seeing it plateau at about 80%. So you are going to be seeing, and I'll mention this on other slides, some difference between what the rate of ridership increase happened at the time that we kind of needed to submit our preliminary budgets versus now. So that's a number that I would anticipate you're likely to see change between now and the public comment budget, and we'll continue to track that. Similar to Metro Transit, we continue to have COVID impacts on our budgets. Kind of the tagline for the storyline for contracted services budget this year is we're seeing higher fuel costs and transit provider contract rates in the preliminary 23 budget. Now those are offset by some lower budgeted general expenses. We've been able to hold those pretty level. Lower premium on-demand service costs, that would be same-day taxi service on Metro Mobility ADA service, and vehicle revenue hours. I'll talk more about all of those in each of the individual services. Like Metro Transit, we continue to look at the data on an ongoing basis. We're continuing to look at Metro Mobility transitioning to a state forecasted program. Again, that does not have any direct impact on the 23 budget, but it's still important, so we're going to keep talking about it. And we're continuing to work on our zero emission fleet plan. So this is really a high-level overview of our contracted services budget and the increase. So Metro Mobility is showing a 5% increase over last year. It's about $102.5 million compared to $97.6 million last year. And this assumes $3.98 per gallon for gas. Want to highlight gas. This is an artifact of timing of when the preliminary budgets were due. Since we built that into our preliminary budget, the fuel costs have gone up to about $5 and they're on their way back down. So just know when you're seeing the fuel prices here, we pay essentially in real time. So just know we're well aware this is not where the fuel is, but the fuel has been so volatile that we just kind of landed here when the preliminary budget is due. And just know this is something we'll be definitely adjusting prior to final adoption and public comment version as well. Our bus and van pool is about a 3.1% increase over last year. One of the things to know about costs in the contracted bus service is while right now it's 3.1%, we're assuming the same kind of service as last year. Some years, if you look at charts, you're going to see our contracted services budget go disproportionately up and other years disproportionately down. And that is generally a function of routes moving between MTS and Metro Transit. So it's not, you can't, looking year over year at the increases in the contracted buses is not really a fair, or not, I should say fair, it's not an accurate analysis of what's actually happening with the budget. So we're assuming diesel at about $3.87 a gallon. Again, same kind of qualification as the regular fuel prices. Then Transit Link's going up about 3.2%. And again, we're talking about just regular gasoline prices there also. So let's get in a little bit more detail. So right now, the Metro Mobility ADA budget's about just shy of $103 million. So state money, this is state general appropriations. Just as a quick reminder, a couple years ago, the legislature split the council state appropriations. So now there is a very defined state appropriation for Metro Mobility service and a very defined allocation for the rest of transit, and then it goes to rail. Federal, there's $25 million of federal COVID relief funds in the Metro Mobility budget. We've got about $8.7 million of fares. And again, that's projected at that 100% level. And we've been, 80%'s been pretty sticky for us, so we'll continue to track what that looks like. And then we've got a planned use of reserves of about $12.5 million. So one of the big differences you're going to see on the expense side between Metro Transit and Metropolitan Transportation Service is the biggest slice of the pie. On the Metro Mobility side, you're going to see that in terms of salary and benefits with council employees. On the MTS side, you're going to see that in transit provider expense. For all of our contracted work, we issue RFPs, we bring those to the council, you adopt those, and that's really setting our rate for the transit provider expenses. One of the dynamics with COVID is that as COVID really came on and still continues to be on, we could toggle down the level of service hours that we had. So in times when ridership is down, you're going to see cost savings or expenses going down in Metro Mobility. And in times when ridership grows, you're going to see those rates go right along with it. If you have 40 passengers or one passenger in a 40-foot bus, the expenses for that bus is going to be the same. There's a big difference between one Metro Mobility rider and 400. So costs really fluctuate they track really closely to what's going on with the ridership. So this dollar amount, again, it's based on ridership coming back to 100%. We've got fuels and materials at about $15 million. So all in, north of 90% of our budget in Metro Mobility is for direct service. It's for the service contracts and fuel. We'll see that taking a look at. We have about $3 million in RA allocations. It's the same things that Ed mentioned in Metro Transit. That is the chair's office. That is legal counsel. That is human resources. We've got about 3% for council salary and staff, about $2 million for contracted services, and then about another, just doesn't even come up to a 0%. So just very, very heavy on fuel and contracted service expenses. Just if you're looking for dollar amounts, the fuel price on the gas side is up $2.7 million or nearly 23% for us. And the thing to keep in mind on our Metro Mobility budget, for every 25% change in fuel costs has about $1 million impact on our budget. That can go positively and negatively. So moving over to contracted bus, transit link, and van pool, we're going to shift away from state general fund appropriations and transition more into motor vehicle sales tax. So that's about $27 million in motor vehicle sales tax. We've got about $1.5 million in fare, and we do have a little bit, we've got about $700,000 of federal money. This is money that comes in for our transit link services through MnDOT in the 5311 rural service providing grants. Again, our budget is very similar in the fact that about north of 90% of the budget is for transit provider expenses. We've got very modest amounts, about $1 million, about 4% of our budget is salary and benefits. And then, you know, all in, the rest of it's about 5% of our budget. Actually, I should back up. Let me give you a couple more details here. The Metro Transits, again, the bus service, we toggle to the Metro Transit bus service, so those service level assumptions are going to be the same at 95% service levels. We are not having, while we are having challenges with operator hiring, it's not to the degree that Metro Transit is, so we're in a better position there. Our diesel costs that are built into the transit provider expenses here, diesel's up 34%. And let's see, Transit Link, general expenses are held flat there. And Transit Link is another place in our budget that it's a demand type service. So as demand goes down, so do our costs. As demand goes up, expenses go up. So we're gonna be keeping a really close eye on what's happening with Transit Link. And Transit Link can become a bigger and smaller part of the overall service plan depending what's happening in the base bus system. Transitioning over to the planning group. Our planning group, our transportation planning group, is doing a lot of work planning for not only implementing the 2040 Thrive MSP 2040, also doing some initial planning work with the other council divisions on the 2050 development guide and the associated transportation policy plan. We are expecting to get additional federal money for the MPO function through the Infrastructure Investments and Job Act. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. And there's a number of regional studies and engagement efforts that the MPO is doing. A couple of the areas that I'll highlight is they're doing additional engagement with diverse stakeholders. They're going to be working on phase 2 of the Principal Arterial Intersection Mobility Study. They're going to be working on the Regional Safety Action Plan, the Regional Transportation and Climate Change Multimodal Measures. All of these are going to be discussed in more detail with you when the transportation planners come and talk to you about their annual work plan. So I'm just going to highlight a few here, and then you'll be able to talk in a lot more depth with the planners later this fall. I also want to note one more project. There is a project to evaluate the regional solicitation that's going to kick off in 2023. It's only got about a $50,000 financial impact, but it's going to, in 23, and then a larger impact in 24. I think the total project is going to be about $500,000. I just wanted to highlight that because it will be taking a look at a process that allocates a lot of money across the region. So when you look at our planning budget, there's about a 3.1% increase. So we're going from about $11.2 million compared to $10.9 million in 2022. We are planning to get about a $1.1 million increase in our planning grant through the federal COVID relief. This is going to be offset by just a very routine cyclical decline in our transportation behavior inventory work. So really, when you put those together, we're getting about an extra $300 million, or excuse me, $300,000 of federal aid. This is no indication at all of how important the transportation behavior inventory is. It's just a 10-year funding cycle, and there's high years and low years. We're just happening to get more federal money on one side while the project work is down a bit. On the pass-through, we pass through funds to the regional suburban opt-out providers and other regional providers, mainly the University of Minnesota. There's about a 2.3% increase in here, and that's a function of two things. One, there's federal operating dollars that are programmed here, and those are competitive awards that have been competitive solicitations that have been awarded to the suburban transit providers, either through the regional solicitation or a program that they've directly applied to the FTA for, and then we pass those funds through. The second component there is motor vehicle sales tax, which we pass through to all providers based upon an established state allocation funding policy. So it's all formula based. I will just make a quick note. There is no COVID federal relief program in the 23 budget, but that is only because all of it's already been brought into the budget. So The CARES money was brought into the budget and fully spent down. The Carissa money was brought into the budget and fully spent down. The ARP funds have been brought into our budget also. So if there was a chance where we needed to carry forward if there was additional funds that hadn't been spent by the suburban providers that have been allocated to them, we'll just bring those into the 23 budget at a later time. So the planning budget's pretty simple. We have federal dollars that we bring in, just under $6 million. And then there's about $4.5 million of motor vehicle sales tax. Most of that is a match to the federal funds. The planning budget also contains some division administration expenses, like Charles is paid for out of that budget. I am paid for that budget. You see our grant staff in front of you at time to time. Those funds are also come out of the planning budget. We have a planned use of reserves of just under $1 million. On the expense side, it's pretty simple. It's our people that do the work, and you see all the consulting studies and all the deliverables coming out of those folks. We hire consultants to help us execute a lot of that work. The regional demands for the type of studies and the subject matter expertise vary from year to year, and hiring consultants gives us the flexibility to get that expertise without having to build all of it in-house. And we pay about $2.2 million in regional allocation costs, which Ed and I have talked about in all of our budgets. So it's a pretty simple on the expense side. And that wraps up the MTS slide. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you to both of you. It's very much appreciated. All right, questions from council members? Anything else we haven't covered yet? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple of weeks ago, you told us about the wonderful program with the University of Minnesota where all of the students are going to get a transit pass. Can you remind us of what the net impact is to the transit budget?
Chair, committee members, if you recall, the first 2 years of the contract are $3.5 million a year. And then years 3 and 4, it's a minimum of $3.5 million and up to $4.375 million, if I recall the numbers correctly.
Thank you.
I just have one quick question. So all 3 rounds of the COVID relief funds have been distributed now to the suburban transit providers already in 2022, correct?
Madam Chair, council members, yes.
Thank you. All right, additional questions or comments from? Oh, thank you, Ed and Heather, for both a really good presentation, but also for being very responsive to all the questions. So it's really been helpful. I think it's been a very good discussion, and thank you to my council members here. There were a lot of good questions asked. It's much appreciated too.
We'll be back on August 10th at the council.
Very good. All right, thank you very much. With that actually concludes our business for this evening. So I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Cummings. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And we are adjourned. I'm gonna keep doing that.
Thank
Because
you.
the last time I didn't do something like that, I got called in the middle of the meeting. So we're just,
I have
because they
to,
said we didn't have to do agendas, and then somebody
told
called.
him, I said, I'll call you when I'm out of the
Called
meeting.
Jenna while I was in the meeting.
I have to phone, so